Have you ever wondered about curses? I mean, are they just old superstitions, or is there maybe something more to it? Well, today we're diving into a fascinating belief system that treats curses not as random bad luck, but as a structured, binding system of spiritual law. And this quote right here, it's really the key to the whole thing. The idea is that a curse isn't just someone wishing you ill. No, it's more like a legal contract in the spiritual world. And that contract, it stays in effect until a higher authority comes along and just overrides it.
All right, Section 1, a system of spiritual law. So, what does that even mean? A spiritual legal system? How's it supposed to work? What are the rules here?
Okay, and this is where it gets pretty interesting. According to this teaching, spiritual opposition isn't just some chaotic force of evil. Nope, it's described as being very legalistic, almost like a cosmic lawyer, always looking for a loophole, some broken rule it can use as a legitimate way in.
So let's be super clear on what we mean by curse in this context. It's not, just yelling at someone in traffic. We're talking about a formal utterance of evil, a devotion to something dark, or a condemnation that's meant to bring about real calamity or torment. Yeah, it's way more serious than just an insult.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. Within this framework, those stubborn, negative patterns you might see in a life, they aren't just random bad luck. They could actually be a sign that a spiritual law is in effect, actively working against someone.
Okay, that brings up a pretty big question, right? If curses are like spiritual laws, where do they even come from? How do they get started? Well, let's get into the origins.
All right, so this teaching lays out a few specific sources. A curse might get its power from disobeying divine commands, or from the words spoken by someone in authority. Think a parent or a spiritual leader. It could be tied to a specific place, a city, a house, a piece of land. Or, and this one's interesting, by bringing a cursed object into your home. And get this, you can even curse yourself through negative vows you make.
Now, to make this whole thing feel a bit more real and less abstract, the teaching points to a pretty famous story from the Bible, the story of Jericho. It's used as a kind of case study for just how powerful and long-lasting a curse can be. Okay, look at this timeline. It's kind of staggering. Way back in the era of Joshua, a curse is pronounced on anyone who tries to rebuild the city of Jericho. Now let's jump forward in time about 500 years later. A man named Hiel decides, you know what? I'm going to rebuild Jericho. And the result? The teaching points to the fact that he lost his firstborn and his youngest sons, seen as a direct one-for-one fulfillment of that ancient curse. 500 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's the whole point they're making here. In this framework, these spiritual laws don't just expire. They can lie dormant for centuries, basically just waiting for someone to trip the wire.
Wow. I mean, a 500-year-old law still having teeth. That sounds pretty inescapable, doesn't it? So the big question is, can it be broken? And according to this teaching, the answer is a resounding yes. But you can't just ignore it. You have to appeal to a higher legal authority. And this is where the whole narrative really pivots.
So you've got these two competing spiritual laws at play, right? On one side, you have the law of the curse. It's rooted in things like disobedience or powerful spoken words, and it binds a person or even a whole family to negative outcomes. But on the other side, you have what this teaching calls the power of the cross. This is presented as the ultimate trump card, the higher authority that can legally redeem and totally nullify the curse's claims.
And where does this idea of a higher authority come from? Well, it's anchored in this verse right here. The belief is that Christ's sacrifice wasn't just a spiritual event, it was a legal one. It, in essence, paid the price, creating a new legal precedent that can be used to overturn any curse. Okay, so that's the theory, but how does it work in practice? I mean, it's one thing to know a higher law exists, but how do you actually apply it? Well, this is where it gets really practical, with a very specific step-by-step process. So there are 5 key steps here in this process of deliverance. Step 1 is identification. You have to figure out what you're dealing with. Step 2 is repentance, asking forgiveness for anything that might have opened the door to it. Step 3, renunciation. You have to verbally, out loud, renounce it. Step 4 is breaking the law. This is where you declare the curse null and void because of that higher authority. And finally, step 5, sanctification. And this is a big one. It's about physically cleansing your environment, getting rid of any objects that might be tied to the curse. So, when you look at that whole process, the logic is really twofold. It's like you're going into a spiritual courtroom.
First, you're tearing up the legal contract that gives the curse its power. And second, you're evicting the spiritual enforcers that were assigned to make sure the curse stuck.
So let's just recap the key takeaways from this teaching. First, curses are seen as a spiritual legal system, not just random chaos. Second, they have specific origins: words, actions, objects, places. Third, the solution is to invoke a higher law based on the sacrifice of Christ. And finally, breaking a curse isn't passive. It's a very deliberate, multi-step process.
So, stepping back from the specifics, what does a framework like this really show us? It's a way of bringing order to chaos, right? It provides a clear if this, then that approach to life's biggest struggles. And that leads to a much bigger question for all of us, no matter what our personal beliefs are. How do the frameworks we use, whether they're spiritual or philosophical or even scientific, how do they shape the way we approach the challenges in our own lives? Definitely something to chew on.